Hello, and welcome to the Antique Auction Forum podcast. And my guest today is Stephen Schofield. I've known Stephen, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to ask him how many years it's been. But without further ado, we're going to be talking about coins, and I want to bring him, coins and stamps that is, I'm going to bring him in right now.
Hey, Martin, how are you?
Thank you. How long have we known each other? I mean,
summer of 1981 was when I went to auction school, and I came back, and a day later I was working with you and your dad at the Seaboard Auction Gallery down in Elliott as a runner.
Wow.
and helping out selling. And I apprenticed with your dad for 6 months and got my auctioneer's license.
Boy, we had a lot of fun, didn't we?
It was great fun. Of course, I wouldn't want to move the stuff around. We were moving then. My back might not last.
I was just telling a friend 2 days ago, because I hurt my back actually because I had to buy something at an auction. It went for such a good deal. So I had to buy it. It was just an incredible deal. Otherwise, I'd just walk away today. But anyway, I was telling when I was 17, I moved I wanted to prove to my father, I don't know why, but you know, I wanted to prove to him that I could move this piano by myself. So him and Jenny went for lunch. And so I moved the piano. It was an upright piano. I got it all the way to the porch, and the trailer was on an angle without me thinking about it. So, so I get the piano in. I made it, and like, hooray. And all of a sudden it goes, boom, boom, right into the front of the trailer. And
nice.
My father was
very nice.
Yeah. Damage control. But anyway, you have, and I've actually helped you. I remember helping you at an auction years ago up in your area where you're living up in New Hampshire, and you had a ton of Staffordshire figurines. Do you remember that auction?
I certainly do. That was a wonderful on-site sale.
It was, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Just like I helped you out when you did the Josiah Bartlett auction.
I remember that. Yes, you were a great help there. Great help. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great memories.
And it's always fun to work with a consummate professional. And you and your dad always were.
Same here. Well, thank you. So I want to talk to you about, you kind of branched off into coins and stamps, and have become very well known for it. I did have a passion for collecting when I was very young. Unfortunately, my father and the whole family went to Florida, and a so-called friend broke into my house and stole all my coins, and then spent them at the Bolorama in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, as face value. And I will tell you this, in that I saved for a whole year doing paper route, lawns, and everything to buy an uncirculated VDBS. And it was spent as a penny.
Well, it's worth more than $1,000 now.
Yeah. I mean,
that makes you feel good.
But anyway, so that kind of dampened, that really tamped down my interest in coins. I didn't even want to look at coins anymore but how did you get into this whole aspect of coins and stamps?
Kind of interesting. When I was 7, I was now old enough to get my nose above the cash register drawer in my parents' and grandparents' store. And so Saturdays, my older brother was in the Boy Scouts, so he was off hiking or camping or whatever he did. And my mom worked Saturdays, and it was time for daycare. And so that was me. I became the cashier. So at the time, this is the mid 50s. I'll date myself. I'll say it was 1955. Everybody on this cast can figure out my age. And I was making 10 cents a week allowance. Well, with 10 cents a week, you could buy 2 packs of baseball cards. And all of a sudden, I needed 5 cents, so I have 5 pennies for my penny collection. And all of a sudden, only 5 cents for 1 pack of baseball cards. So I got really good at flipping baseball cards with my friends so I could win and get more cards. And that's how I started. And stamps were because of the envelopes that my folks were throwing out from the business. And I said, gee, I could just rip the corner of an envelope off with a stamp on it. In those days, of course, every stamp you licked wasn't the peel and stick like you have today.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And it was a pretty simple process. You put the corner in a cereal bowl of water, the glue would dissolve, you dry the stamp, and you could put it in your stamp album. And it's that from those simple beginnings, it's became a passion as a collector, and now I earn my living doing it.
and you do very well at it. But let me ask you this: do you think it's technology or the information age that just makes someone like you not come along so often today? I'm talking about young people's interest in collecting this type of thing.
Well, with young people, with collecting any kind of product or whatever it might be, it's just there's not a lot of interest. I mean, I grew up in a time when we didn't have a television in the house. My folks would sit my brother and I down in front of the big box radio to listen to serials, and They would say, "Don't beat each other up." And so it was a time where you had time. You talk about stamps. Well, the collectors of stamps were the greatest generation in early baby boomers because they had the time to do these things. It was quiet. You could not bother people like your mom and dad and your grandparents if you had multi-generations at home. And you could learn about history and you could learn about geography, and it was really great. With coins, you could just learn about what was going on with different eras. I mean, a simple example is, why did they make in a given year so few coins? Well, it gets tied back to the economic situation. If we were in a recession or a depression, the economy didn't need a lot of circulating coins, so the government would stop making a lot, or they wouldn't even make a particular denomination in a given year. So all of that kinds of plays into being fascinated with history and the way we work as a country.
I have a question for you. It just came to mind when you're saying this. I had a neighbor once when I was growing up, and she said that she believed she had one of the rarest coins that there was. And so I remember asking her what it was, and she said it was a copper 1944 penny. I think she said 1944, when there were zinc. Is that even possible?
Yes, actually it was 1943. During World War II, in the middle of the war in 1943, copper was such an important strategic war metal that they made zinc-coated steel pennies just for that particular year. But when they changed over from 1942 to 1943, there was still some old copper blanks left in the hoppers, and they got fed through and got coined. There are, I believe, about 14 or 15 of the 1943 copper pennies, just like in 1944, when they went back to the copper pennies, there were still some zinc and steel blanks left in the hoppers, and so there are actually some 1944 steel pennies. And I should make a little bit of a comment here. In 1944 and 45, most of the pennies were actually made out of used shell casings from military training. As guys were going through basic, you had all of these spent rounds, and they got
that
recycled.
Was brass, though. There wasn't brass.
Well, it was just the alloy that was used, and there was a mixture. They weren't pure copper. It's just an interesting dynamic from the war years. And
so, if she indeed had that coin, would it have been an extremely valuable coin?
Massively. I mean,
really?
You're talking in today's market, you're talking about $250,000 or more. For one of them.
I'm going to have to talk to my friend. He's still in the same house. He never moved.
Yeah, but the trick is, a lot of people would take a 1943 steel penny and they would copper coat it through a plating process, which if you had a chemistry shed as a kid, you could do that. And so it was always fun. But since steel pennies would be attracted to a magnet, that's the first tell.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'll bring my magnet. When I go visit him.
Bring a magnet, and then you can. Yeah. But if the coin is not attracted to the magnet and says 1943, you want to have a new best friend.
That's all right. We've lost touch a little bit. So
okay.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Yeah. So yeah. As far as you making the switch over, I never really saw that. I was out in California for a while, but when did you actually switch over to just opening up Centennial coin? And by the way, I'm going to pull up the website so people can see it.
Okay, well, Centennial, which is a subsidiary of our parent corporation, started in the mid '90s, and we had a partner at the time. Right now, it's just my wife and I that own the company. We bought out our partner years ago, but it was started specifically to brand itself for coins and eventually stamps. The parent company did personal property auctions and some real estate. And so that's kind of what happened. We just wanted to have a separate branch, and of course, bringing a partner in, we didn't want that individual tied to the on-site and estate auctions and the furniture and those things. Now, I see you brought up the website, and you brought up an interesting image. That coin is an 1895 Morgan silver dollar. In that year, they only made 880 of them, and they only made them in a particular condition called proof. A proof coin is something that's specially made by the mint. The blanks are prepared specially, and then when the coin is actually stamped, the coin undergoes a significantly more pressure on it. So you've got great details on the face and the head and all the letters, and on the back or the reverse on the eagle and everything else. That the design is very, very vibrant. In addition, those coins are never shooed into a hopper and put into a bag of 1,000. That's how they would process silver dollars. Just make 1,000. There'd be a counting machine. It'd put into a canvas bag. They'd sew it closed, and some guy would throw it into a horse-drawn cart in 1895. But because we were in a depression in 1895, it's a small mintage. It's a coin that's known as basically the king of silver dollars, and we actually found one as part of an entire proof set, being a penny, nickel, dime, quarter, half dollar, and this particular silver dollar. The reason that you have that interesting toning different on the eagle on the back of the coin is because there was a quarter that was sitting on top of that when I unpacked that from literally the original mint envelope. This came out of an estate. The grandpa had collected this. Actually, he'd gone to the mint in 1895 and bought it. He died in 1955. His daughter, who I'll just say was mom, passed in 2010, and she was 100. And this was in a shoebox underneath her bed at assisted living. And the living children called me in to do an appraisal. And it was fascinating because this was still in the original sealed mint envelope, because grandpa and mom told the kids, don't open this, it's valuable and we don't want to mess it up. And it's almost impossible. We called that auction the time capsule collection because we had about 25 early proof sets between the early 1880s and 1915.
Wow. What did that particular one sell for? Do you remember?
That particular set sold for about $265,000.
Oh my goodness. Isn't that something? Wow.
It was fun.
Oh, that's so exciting. And I want to tell first of all a couple things, because there's a lot of people that really may consider collecting coins, or think about it, or had collected coins. It's really, really rare to find something rare. I want to get that point across, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't look. What do you say to that comment?
I'd say you're 100% correct. The rare coins that we run into today in estates or in houses are things that just got stuck in a drawer years ago, or for some reason got pulled out of circulation and put in somebody's pocket and got saved. And at the time, it was just worth face value. And over the years, all of a sudden, things become very valuable. I remember being in a house in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and I'm sure you remember when you were collecting, there were these Whitman folders. and at the time they probably cost you 19 cents.
Oh yes,
and
yeah.
And you would push the coin into the slot.
The blue things, they're blue.
The blue things, the blue foldy things. I'm not going to get up and grab one right now, but
but there's plenty around.
Yes, there are, and you never know what you're going to find in one of those, I'll say, blue foldy things. But we made a particular kind of half a dollar in the United States from 1916 to 1947 called a Walking Liberty half dollar, and in 1921. The coins from Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco were pretty rare, especially in higher grades, because all the coins from, let's say, the early 20s and earlier, once you got into the Depression in the mid to late 20s, people didn't save that stuff. They needed to spend it because they needed to live, they needed to eat. So coins that are closer to new would become much more valuable. And I remember opening up that Liberty half dollar album, sitting in this lady's kitchen and opening up and looking at it and saying, oh, it's all stuff. And at the time, all the coins more or less were worth about $1.50 because of the wear. And then I closed it and I'm thinking, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And I reopened it up, and there was the 1921 S in a very high grade condition that we sold for $3,000.
Wow.
But I could see somebody else possibly coming in and not being willing to disclose that and not getting excited about that, saying, oh, it's just worth $1.50 and make a lot of money. So it's very important, if you have somebody coming in to look at your coins, or you bring your coins to somebody, that you know who you're dealing with. You just want to be sure that you're reputable and they're ethical.
You're right. Trust is a very important thing when it comes to, especially when it comes to something like coins, stamps, and jewelry. Those are the things where you really have to trust someone if you're out there and you have something. Just to give an example, now I know most people are listening to this as an audio podcast. I will share some of the pictures. This is just to give you an example of the Walking Liberty 50-cent piece, half dollar. Right.
Correct. That's actually a proof one, so it looks pretty nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I can give you another example of a rare coin. We were in Providence this past year, and we were looking in somebody's collection that they had in a series of drawers, and all of a sudden there was a $5 gold piece. And I'm going, well, that's kind of interesting, because it was from 1829. And I looked at it and I'm going, this is a pretty rare coin. And it turns out that this coin was handed down through the family by who I'll call the patriarch, because I can't go I don't know how to go further back. This was a gentleman that was appointed to the Senate out of Ohio. He was a Supreme Court justice back then. And when William Henry Harrison was elected president, this guy was appointed to fill his shoes in the U.S. Senate. Well, from the story law there, you just found it. The long and the short of was, we sold that this summer for about $40,000, and it was sitting in a drawer for years and years and years, and the family really didn't have any idea. They thought it was worth about 15 if they were lucky.
Well, let's go the other way. Let's go the more than often way. And I've actually sent you on a couple of at least one wild goose chase.
Yes.
Where there was massive amounts of stamps. I remember this place in Maine. I got a hold of you. There were buildings full of stamps.
The walls and walls of it.
And worth hardly anything. Worth face value,
we have a term for that in the stamp end of the operation, and we call it wallpaper. It's just like what is the highest and best use of a picture, or gee, you need to cover up an old stove hole on your living room wall, and you say, well, I think this picture will fit there, and that's a good thing. Well, it's the same thing with stamps. The stamps may be less expensive for you to stick all your stamps on the wall than to actually repaint it. If stamps are stored improperly, stamps are made out of paper, and so if they get damp or mildewed, there's no recovery. You can have
right.
a really valuable stamp, but if it stinks, it's not any good. And I also caution people, again, this is no reflection on anybody, but for years and years, people did an awful lot of smoking. And if they were a heavy smoker and they were also a stamp collector, you can go into that person's house, you can open up a stamp album, and if that person wasn't a smoker, that stamp album could be worth $10,000. As a smoker, it might be worth $200 because nobody wants the stuff. They don't want smelly things.
Can it be put in like an ozone
odor? I'm sure it can be, but if I'm going in to appraise the material, I'm not looking to do any extraordinary things to try to restore something. It's just, or people will take, Grandpa collected stamps and they take the box of stamps and they put them in the basement, and the basement is damp, and there are problems. So
seen a lot of that.
There's a flood. Well, paper and water don't do very well together.
Yeah. So how many would you say, if I'm sure it's like in the antique business, you say you get the sewing machine call. And so many people, because there were so many darn sewing machines, treadle sewing machines made. The household usually had two. They lasted forever. They're still there. So people will call you, I have this wonderful sewing machine. You have to tell them it's worth $25.
That's
How
correct.
many of the sewing machine stamp-related calls do you get a year?
Out of probably 99 out of 100 are those kinds of things, because people generally, if they were collecting stamps, probably started as a kid like I did, didn't have a whole lot of money, so they were saving used stamps that had been canceled to sell mail or packages, and that means they're going to be less valuable. Think of the concept that the further back you go in time, the less population there was, and commerce was significantly less. In the United States, it wasn't until 1892 that we made a stamp that had a face value of over 90 cents. And that was for the Columbian Exposition. And they made commemorative stamps, and the high values were $1, $2, $3, $4, and $5 stamps. Well, think about what you would be doing as just a grunt worker in 1892, and how long it would take you to make $5 to buy a stamp, and then what would you have to send that would be worth $5 when it only cost a penny or two to send a postcard or a letter. And so the more valuable stamps from any country in the world are going to be, number one, your higher values. Number two, the stamps that were never used. Number three, stamps that have original gum on the back and have never had a hinge placed on it to get stuck into an album. And so there's a lot of issues. Is the centering good? What do the perforations look like? Because remember, stamps in those days were made in sheets of 50 or 100, and you had to rip them apart. But stamps, for example, the first stamp in the United States wasn't made until 1847. And we started making coins in 1793. Yeah. So before 1847 in the States, you'd go to the post office and you'd say you want to send a stamp to
seamless cover
to Florida, and the postmaster would say, it's going to cost you 3 cents. You'd give the guy 3 cents, and he would write a 3 on it and stamp it, and it would go off. As you say, stampless covers.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this though. Is this one of the? No, that's a 5-cent stamp. So that's not.
Well, no, that actually is a sample of a number one stamp. The Scott Stamp Company in the late 1800s came up with a categorizing system and a cataloging system. The first stamp issued by any country anywhere in the world is the number one stamp from that country, and this would be a U.S. number one with Ben Franklin, and then the number two stamp that would have X on it for the Roman numeral 10, a 10-cent stamp, has George Washington on it.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about this because I remember when this, I don't know if it's this exact stamp, but boy, did that ever make waves. And let's talk about this stamp again. If you're listening just to the audio, this is the upside down biplane 24-cent stamp.
Yes, the cataloging number for this is a C3. C is the category that anywhere in the world an airmail stamp would have the prefix, a big capital letter C. And this 24-cent stamp was the third stamp issued by the United States as an airmail stamp. there was one sheet that at the Bureau of Engraving and Printing that inadvertently went through upside down. If you'll notice, there's red printing and there's blue printing. Yeah. So that was not done at the same time like we could do today. Every time you added a color in the 20s to a stamp process, you had to run it through the press a second or a third or a fourth time. So it ran through with the red first, and then the sheet got turned upside down, and the biplane got printed upside down. And somebody in Philadelphia bought that sheet, who happened to be a stamp dealer, and recognized what the problem was. And what he did was, in the upper left-hand corner, remember this was a sheet of 100 stamps, he in pencil wrote on each stamp the number from left to right. So in the top block of 10 stamps, again being left to right, he started with number 1. The far right stamp would have been number 10, and if you went all the way to the very bottom on the far right, that would be number 100. And he cut that, or he separated that out into individual stamps and into blocks or plate blocks that have the number in the corner on it, and he sold them. And we had the incredible luck to find one of these in an album under a bed in Concord, New Hampshire in 1995. And it actually was one of the lost stamps. At that time, there were 6 stamps that were unknown out of the original 100. And this was position number 73.
So it had the number on it. Yeah.
It had 73 on it, and it was documented that number 73 had been missing since the early 1930s. Well, what happened was the guy that bought it, it was in his estate, and he bought it in 1928 from an auction company that went belly up during the Depression. And he just kept it. And there was no record as to who bought it and where it went. He never displayed it. He never showed it. He just kept it in his album.
Wow.
And so you just never know. Now, it was a situation where we specifically didn't sell it. We actually placed it with a major international auction company because at the time, we're going back 25 years ago. I didn't feel that we had the market in New Hampshire then that we would have now to be able to sell it.
Yeah.
And I needed to do my due diligence and recommend what was in the best interest of my clients. It actually sold then for $88,000. It's worth closer to $200,000 today.
Wow. Amazing. And I do want to commend you for that. Sometimes it's hard to, when it comes to ego, to do that decision that you did. But I'm telling you, I've done it a few times, and I've never regretted it, because you're working for the client, and this is why people can trust you, because you are there to get them the best money. What we're hired to do when we go in a situation like that, we're not hired to go in there and say, "Hey, I'll give you $50 for this." We're hired in there to go on a commission or a fee basis to try to do the best for the client, and that's a great story. I thought there was one. Wasn't there one that sold for a huge amount of money? Am I thinking of a different stamp, or was it 200,000? Was that the number?
It probably was. Well, I think one of the most recent sales of a Jenny was in the $250,000 range.
Okay, all right. Now I want to talk to you about a misconception, and that is this. I'm pulling this up, and it's a Roman coin, but what makes this an exceptional coin is that it's a Roman gold coin.
That's correct.
What the misconception I'm getting at or talking about is the fact that these coins, when someone will, I've gotten the phone call, I'm sure you've gotten the phone call many times, where someone says, "I have a Roman coin, it's 2,000 years old, or it's 1,500 years old," and they're all excited and jumping up and down. And then you find out it's worth $40.
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky. Yeah.
If you're lucky. Well, what you need to recognize that even though, the Greeks and the Romans were so long ago relative to us, they were pretty successful as societies, and their economic system was pretty successful, and they made an awful lot of coins. And I don't think they had banks like we had them back then. So people would store their coins. They put them in a jug or some kind of a pottery jar, and they might bury them in the backyard. So lots of coins have been dug up over the years, and things that are dug up, especially if they're not gold, if they're bronze coins, they don't react well to dirt and water, and so it's pretty easy to determine what's a ground recovery. This particular coin is interesting because if you notice from the chin down to the edge at about 530 on the edge of that coin, you will see that there's kind of a chunk that's missing, and there are two ways that chunk could be missing. One is because there was a problem in the blank, and the blank wasn't made well, and so when the coin was pressed, that piece of metal popped out, or somebody wanted to determine what the exact alloy was, so they scraped some of the gold out and tested it. And of course, that diminishes the value when that happens.
Now, what is a gold coin like this? Because it was gold, this is what made this a valuable coin. But what type of value in this particular one? Do you remember?
Yeah, around $1,500. I mean, not astronomical. There are ancient gold coins that have sold for over $1 million, but there are only one or two known. They have an unusual design on them. Maybe it's an emperor. Maybe it's just a vignette, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But when you get into the populations of a particular coin, where let's say there are 5 or less, some are going to be, impounded in a museum. Might be in the British Museum, might be in Athens in their museum.
I see. Now, let me ask you this. I do remember, going back to this coin, I do remember as a kid, I don't know if it was my father or my grandfather, someone told me that people used to bite gold coins to make sure they were gold. Is that something you've heard of?
Oh gosh, I've seen people do it. Because it's pretty easy to make a counterfeit gold coin out of lead, and
because it's heavy. Mm-hmm.
It has a heavy specific gravity, and then you can make it look like gold. And so if you try biting a coin that's made out of lead, you're going to make a pretty big impression pretty quickly. Now, I don't recommend you do that very oftenly, and I certainly don't recommend you eat lead, but it's something that people would do. And
do you remember you were talking earlier about you helping me out at the Josiah Bartlett auction?
Oh, yes.
And in his apothecary case, he had lead pills.
Yes.
And they thought that was a thing you take, is lead pills. And this is, an early 18th century idea. I don't know when that changed, but oh boy, that's really something.
Well, but that's the same as bloodletting and heroin.
And they did a lot of that.
Yes.
Yeah, the bloodletting was in his journal almost every day. There'd be bloodletting.
That's correct.
As a doctor, he was a doctor.
Yes.
So let me ask you this: what are you have told me this story a long time ago? When I say a long time, a couple of years ago, maybe, that there are people out there trying to get young people into, say, collecting stamps by going to these stamp collections that are worthless, basically, and sharing them with young people. Can you talk about that?
Well, it's actually the same with coins, and as I mentioned earlier, yes, pretty much where you're looking at trying to come up with history. With stamps, you have stamps that maybe of pounds of stamps that might not be worth very much money, and sorting through where are the different countries, what are the countries that may not exist anymore. Trying to figure out what the various different British Empire and Commonwealth countries are and where they are. I mean, the example that I like to use is FDR was a stamp collector as a kid. And so when we started getting close to World War II, he was meeting, obviously, with people from the Pentagon and the military. And they would say, well, we can get this warship from point A to point B, being this country to that island. And Roosevelt will say, that's pretty good. How are you going to do it in a day when they're 5,000 miles apart? So strategically for us during World War II, it was great that he had an idea about geography. And that's one of the things that can be done as a learning tool, where kids aren't even learning or don't even know that they're learning about this kind of stuff. And it's the same with coins. Who were the pictures of what did the presidents do? Who and when did they serve, and when did they live, and what was going on in the country when they were in office? And it's pretty easy, you know, with Lincoln on a penny and Jefferson on the nickel and Roosevelt on the dime, Washington on the quarter, Kennedy on the $50. And now we've got dollars where you have Native Americans and you have presidential dollars. So there's a lot of things that could be done very inexpensively where you can find things. The state quarters, the national parks quarters, the territorial quarters that started in in the 1990s. Well, they're just wonderful tools to learn things because you'll find this stuff in circulation.
That's really great. And you know, I never really thought of that. You know what makes things so interesting to me, and always has, is the history and the connections that they make. And you just laid that out perfectly well. I mean, you know, you get to see, it's kind of like a window into what's going on. And
well, it is. I mean, the first state quarters came out in 1999, and the first one was from Delaware, and the second was from Pennsylvania, because they were issuing them in order from what state or what colony actually at that time ratified the Constitution.
Here's a good example.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Here's a good example of a Native American on. I don't believe I've ever seen this particular bill before.
Well, and that is one of the two most popular large-size pieces of paper money. That's an 1899 $5 silver certificate, and Chief Ani Papa is the image that's on that silver certificate. And it's just paper money collectors just love that, and people that like Americana love that. When I say a large size bill, the kind of money we keep on our wallets today are small notes. What was happening during the economic expansion of the 20s is we were printing so many of those bills, which have the nickname horse blanket. Doesn't matter what the denomination, they were those large size.
Wow.
And they fit in large wallets. And it was costing too much money for the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to print them. So they came up with the smaller size design, and they started working on that in 1927 and 1928. So what did the government do? In 1929, they introduced the small size note, and we go into a depression, and we don't need any money at all because nobody's working. But slowly, and there was big pushback by the people in the country because they really liked the old big notes. But eventually, the old notes like that got taken out of circulation, and the new notes, as we know them today, came into being.
Now, let me ask you this, and I know we'll go a little bit longer if it's okay with you.
That's fine.
What is the largest note that was? Was it? I know there's $1,000 bills, but were there bills that were printed in the U.S. that were actually larger than a $1,000 bill?
Yeah, believe it or not, the largest denomination bill was $100,000.
100,000?
Yeah, but those didn't circulate.
I can see why. You're not going to go to Walmart with a
No, those were used for bank to bank transfers.
Yeah. Well, what about the ones that were circulated? What's the largest bill that was circulated?
Generally, the largest bills were the $500 and the $1,000 bills, and Richard Nixon, when he was president, stopped them from being printed and being used in circulation because of basically money laundering that started back in the 60s.
Wow. I want to talk about this, and I also want to tell people in the audio podcast that I'm going to link Stephen's website on this podcast. You can, and I'll put some pictures in too. But right now we're planted on this amazing condition on this 1915 Indian head buffalo nickel. Let's talk about that. Was that a
actually it's a 1913, even though if you're looking at it kind of at a glance, it does look like 1915. Yeah. It turns out that came out of that time capsule collection from the 1913 proof set, and
Oh,
you'll
yeah.
you'll if you're looking at this visually, you will see the plastic prongs. We
Yeah.
had all of those proof sets professionally graded by one of the major grading services, and because we needed to protect them, we didn't want to take a chance of people getting fingerprints on them, or damaging them, or dropping
Yeah.
them on the floor. So they're in those holders. It turns out that is the finest known 1913 Liberty nickel, and we ended up getting close to $100,000 for that one.
You mean Buffalo nickel?
I'm sorry. Yes, I apologize. Yeah. Buffalo nickel. Yes.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. I think this is a very good point to bring up. You may say it's not, but I think it is. I noticed when you let's see, when we brought up this coin, I just had it up there before. The condition of the coin, you showed where there was a shadow where the quarter was on top of it, and you left it alone. How important is it to leave something alone when it's rare?
It's just like I guess the analysis or analogy that I would use is if you saw a piece of dust on the Mona Lisa in the Louvre, you wouldn't walk up with a bottle of Windex and a rag and try to take it off. It's just you want to keep things original. And with coins, it's paramount. That toning that you saw was from 125 years of sitting in an envelope, not going anywhere. And because we didn't have acid-free archival paper back then, and who cared? It cost like $1.05 in those days to buy that coin from the mint in 1895. So the acid that was in the paper caused the toning from direct contact.
Yeah.
And
wow. So yeah, I mean, I remember when I first started collecting coins, and we're talking about, I had a paper route very young, like 9 years old. And there was, you always wonder how people get into collecting. And in this particular case, there was this elderly couple with no children, and they used to pay, it was 50 cents a week for the newspaper, the Portsmouth Herald newspaper. I think if that's what it was, something like that. But they always paid me in their coin collection and old coins.
Very nice.
And that started me collecting. I mean, I just fell in love with it. Every single week I look forward to going to their house.
But I also would like to add, Barton, that under no circumstances, for any reason whatsoever, should you attempt to clean a coin.
Yeah.
If you can't read a date, you don't take a pencil eraser. You don't take silver or copper polish. I have seen 20,000.
And that's what I was doing it at first. I was going to mention that.
Okay.
And until I learned, when I was like 9 or 10 years old, I went to the kitchen cabinet and found some, silver polish and started cleaning the coins before I knew any better. I remember the way it smelled already. I can still remember. But getting it, taking the tarnish off or whatever, and it's not a good idea. It's every time you clean something, you're removing something.
Yes, I've seen $25,000 coins turned into $2,000 and $3,000 coins.
Wow!
Because people have messed with them.
Yeah. And say someone has, like you get the 99 calls and one good call when it comes to stamps. Is there anything in particular you could tell someone if they're just curious? Hey, maybe Dad's stamps are worth something, or I think it's much easier with coins for someone to figure out if they have something of value. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but
no, you're not. You're not. The trick with stamps is how have they been preserved over the years? If they're in albums, what kind of album are they? Albums that were designed for children and collectors that did not have a whole lot of money don't have spaces for high value stamps, because it would be very frustrating for a kid. They couldn't partially fill up a page because the page didn't have any stamps that they could afford or that they could find. And so the title of the album, what it looks like, when it was printed, all would tell me. And I do this kind of forensic stuff over the phone with people that say, well, I've got this big collection, and before I want to go to the house, I want to know what they have. So they'll tell me, well, the album is red or the album is green. And I will ask, what does it say on front of it? What does it say on the side of it? When you open it up, what does the front page say, what's the date on it? You know, who printed it? Who's the manufacturer? And if you've been around this long enough, you know what the albums that should have good stamps in and don't have good stamps. Then what you do is you go to the pages where there should be valuable stamps. And if a page is full, and I remember one time you sent me somewhere that had a very nice Canadian collection, and I opened it up and all the good stamps were in there. That was pretty neat because you don't see that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have a bunch of stamps that have been ripped off the corner of an envelope and thrown into an old cigar box or a shoe box, you don't have very much there. That's probably fire starter material.
Or the wallpaper again.
That's correct.
The last thing I'd like to talk to you about is, okay, so now you're in a house and people want to sell their things. Can you walk the listening audience how you go through the whole process and it goes to auction and what you do to put it in your auction? And because I think it's a lot of people just don't know how that process works. I have to explain it to people. I'm sure you do too.
All the time. But the first thing that I will do is I will make sure that any coins that need to be protective go in their proper holders before they get moved anywhere, because most of the time I'll go in to a house and they will have laid out the collection on the dining room table, and you want to make sure that the $500 and $1,000 coin aren't sitting around and going back into a box where they can get jiggled around and scratched or anything like that. And it really is a matter of just evaluating what's there, figuring out what the good things are and pointing them out to the people and telling them what the wholesale value of things are, and finding out what their intentions are, whether they want to sell it right away for a cash offer, whether they want to go to auction where you will have a combination of collectors, investors, and dealers that will be significantly competing for their material. And in most cases, after the commission is taken away from whatever they have gotten, let's say something sells for $100 and the commission is 10%, so they would get $90. Will that $90 be actually more than somebody giving them a cash offer? Is it worth hiring somebody to sell it for them as opposed to taking the money and run? Now, with precious metals, for example, gold and silver, if the coins are very common and they're tied to the gold and silver price, and somebody's not doing an auction for a month or two, you may be worried that those prices are going to go down. So you might want to lock in today's price. I mean, 2 months ago, gold, for example, was over $2,000 an ounce. This morning when I looked, it was about $1,850 an ounce. So you've had a little bit of a drop, but that stuff trades based upon what's happening on the international monetary markets and economies, and you know, it ran up with COVID. It's backed off with the stronger dollar. Tomorrow it could go up $100 because some shoe drops that we're not aware of.
Right, and if it goes to auction, you go through the very rigorous cataloging of it, and as we saw earlier, photography, really nice photography of your pieces that come up, and then it's offered online. And people from anywhere in the world can bid basically on an online platform.
That's correct. And it depends upon what each auction company likes to do. Most of your major auction houses will be a combination of online and in person, where you actually have people bidding from the floor, and people take bids that way. Yeah.
And one last thing, you mentioned COVID. I hate even bringing that topic up, but
I understand.
But that, to me, what I've witnessed at other auctions is it seems like things are doing pretty darn well. What's the coin and stamp auction business like?
Well, we had 3 auctions scheduled in mid-April, and I can tell you that on Monday morning, March 16th, we were scheduled to go to the printer. And there was something that was a little funky over that weekend going into St. Paddy's Day. And on Monday morning, I said, we're going to hold off one more day. And of course, by Tuesday, the 17th, pardon the expression, it had hit the fan and we were shut down. So we would have had a catalog that would have been useless.
Wow.
And we had to wait because we operate in New Hampshire, we had to wait until we have permission from the governor to have indoor gatherings. And when he opened up New Hampshire, he opened it up so that you could have up to 50% maximum capacity. So if a function room held 200 people, you could put 100 people in. Well, of course, the hotel that we use also wanted to make sure there was proper social distancing. So it took us a week once we were allowed to reopen to negotiate with them, coming up with different floor plans, where we would have the merchandise displayed, how we would put our customers in the room, and what would happen if too many customers showed up. So we literally put our auctions together for July, late in July, and we did no marketing whatsoever other than mailing catalogs to our current customer base and posting our auctions online. And we pretty much close to filled the room for both our stamp and 2 coin auctions. And the net result of that auction was it came in at 50% above our estimates. Because what had happened was...
That's amazing.
It was to us. We didn't expect that, but what literally happened was when you had the shutdown, there were no longer any weekly or monthly coin or stamp shows, both locally, nationally, or regionally. And so all of a sudden, dealers are selling product to their client base, but they're not having a simple and easy way of replenishing their stock and inventory. So we had a state material that was fresh to the market, and they literally were beating themselves up to buy the stuff. And then we did an auction 3 weeks ago, and it was the same, massively successful, came in at 50% over what we had estimated in catalog because people really wanted to do that. Now, will that happen next time? I don't know. We have not scheduled any dates for 2021, and it's the first time in 20 years we've not scheduled a year in advance because we don't do our auctions in the winter. We start in April, and I just want to wait another couple of months to see what we can and can't do.
That's I think that's a wise decision. And like Wes Cowan said on this show in particular, when the pandemic started, he said collectors have to collect.
Yes.
You know? It's a drive. So anyway, Steve, I consider you a good friend, and as always, it was really interesting talking to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for asking me, Martin. I had a wonderful time, and I hope I've helped a few people out in their decision making down the road.
I hope so too, and that's centennialauctions.com.
It's pretty simple. Yes.
Yep. And again, everyone, I will have information up in the show notes. Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you.
All right. All right, everyone. So that's it for the show today. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.